The Architect of Worlds narrates the journey of Martha, a soul who, under the silver cloak of time and the worn leather of the road, discovered that the true resonance of the heart is not found in speed, but in the quietness of acts of kindness. She understood that the longest road was not the one leading to distant destinations, but the one that led the heart back to the warmth of giving, transforming solitude into a melody of shared memories. The shed, more than a dwelling, was a sanctuary of memories for Martha. The afternoon light filtered through the high cracks, drew dancing grooves in the suspended dust, illuminating hanging tools that, at the slightest breeze, emitted a metallic tinkling, almost a whisper. That sound, once a cheerful chorus of a shared craft, was now the constant symphony of a profound silence, the melody of time that insisted on passing, indifferent to her loss. On the dark wooden workbench rested an old helmet, with scratches that told stories of journeys. And smiles. It was his. She touched it from time to time, just to feel the cold texture and remember the warmth of his presence. Martha, with more than 6 decades etched into her skin and eyes that had seen the world at high speed, moved with the slowness of someone carrying an invisible weight. The widow for years had found refuge in the freedom of the road, the only way to keep breathing without the air seeming too heavy. Every morning, even before the sun tinged the horizon with shades of peach and honey, she was already in the workshop. The ritual was always the same. She prepared a pot of herbal tea, bitter and strong, and placed 2 cups on the table. One for her, the other, untouched, for his memory. An old recipe book with yellowed pages and notes made by hands that were no longer there was her silent companion, an echo of past laughter. The motorcycle, an ancient relic, was an extension of her soul. She spent hours polishing the chrome, checking the engine, feeling the oil on her knobby fingertips. Each part was a piece of history, each repair a silent dialogue with time. For Martha, the roar of the engine wasn't just a sound, it was the voice of the road calling, the promise that, for a few hours, she could be just a shadow, free from the weight of being seen and yet ignored. Invisibility for Martha was an open wound, though she hid it with the dignity of someone who chooses resilience. In the small store of the nearest village, where she went to get supplies, she was treated with a mix of distant respect and veiled impatience. The young cashier girl, with her hurried gaze, barely looked up, while the whispers of the elders followed her like a trail of smoke. "The motorcycle widow," they murmured, always alone, always to herself. They saw the leather, the silver hair, the gleaming machine, but not the soul behind the handlebars, the woman who carried an ocean of memories in her eyes. A brief flashback took her back to a late afternoon, not so different from that one. She and her husband, sitting in front of the shed watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and purple, his hand in hers, the smell of gasoline and wet earth mixing in the air, the silent promise of a lifetime of roads. The memory was like an old photograph, faded at the edges but still able to squeeze the heart with the sweetness of loss and the poignancy of present solitude. She felt the chill of absence, a void that not even the strong wind of the road could fully fill. And with each departure, the motorcycle's engine seemed to roar not just for freedom, but also for an echo, for a companionship that was gone. On that cloudy late afternoon, the old engine echoed solitarily through the curves of the road. Martha, wrapped in her worn leather jacket, felt the wind whipping her face, a cold embrace that was already familiar to her. There was no set destination, just the urge to cover miles, to leave behind the silence of her shed and the weight of the invisibility that enveloped her. With each curve, the landscape unfolded in faded shades of green and grey, a melancholic painting that seemed to mirror her own state of mind. She wasn't seeking anything, just the cadence of the path, the illusion of movement that blended with life itself. Then, on the side of the deserted road, the sight broke the monotony of the asphalt. A small figure crouched near a stone marker, almost blending with the dry grass. Martha, accustomed to seeing only the vastness, hesitated for a moment, her body reacting before her mind could process it. She braked the motorcycle slowly, the engine sound diminishing to a whisper, and dismounted with the slowness of someone who doesn't want to scare. She removed her helmet, her silver hair coming loose, and walked with firm but careful steps, like approaching a wounded animal. The girl, who seemed to be about 8 years old, hugged a small stuffed bear, dirty and crumpled, her only confidant in that vast nothingness. The lost gaze, scraped knees and trembling hands betrayed her helplessness. Martha noticed her own heart beating faster, a forgotten rhythm. "Hey, are you okay?" asked Martha, with a voice that time had made soft, almost a hoarse song. The girl looked up, her eyes wide, reflecting the grey sky. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. "I got lost," she whispered, her thin voice laden with unshed tears. The helplessness of that small creature was a mirror of Martha's own solitude, but at the same time an urgent call. Without thinking twice, the biker took off her leather jacket, which had protected her from the wind and time for so many years, and covered the girl's fragile shoulders. The smell of leather and road, once an aroma of freedom for Martha, now enveloped the girl like a protective hug. "Come with me, little one. The road is long, but it always leads to somewhere better," said Martha, extending her hand. The girl, Leah, touched it with small and hesitant fingers, a fragile but real connection that broke the cocoon of silence Martha had built around herself. She climbed onto the back of the motorcycle, her tiny body nestled against the woman's firm back, and they rode off together. The roar of the engine, once a sound of escape, was now a sound of shelter, of an unexpected purpose. In the shed, the dying light of the afternoon painted the walls in golden and melancholic tones. Leah got off the motorcycle with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The place for Martha was her extension. For Leah, a new universe, full of smells of grease, rubber and metal. Martha turned on a hanging lamp, chasing away the shadows, and pointed to a worn armchair. The girl sat down, clutching the bear, watching every movement of the woman. Martha, in turn, felt a strange mix of discomfort and an old warmth, which seemed to come from a time when her shed wasn't just a repository of tools, but of voices and laughter. While preparing a simple soup, Leah peeked curiously at the old photos pinned to the wall, dusty, witnesses to a time that no longer existed. In one of them, Martha appeared younger, with dark hair, next to a group of smiling riders, her old road family. They looked invincible, their motorcycles gleaming under a relentless sun. Leah touched the photo with her fingertip. "Were you alone too?" asked the girl, her voice almost inaudible, but loaded with a perceptiveness that touched Martha deep in her soul. Martha paused, the wooden spoon hovering over the steaming soup. A sigh escaped her lips. "I still am a little," she replied, a tired smile emerging. "But the road taught me that those who help never walk alone." The phrase, said to Leah, seemed to echo back to Martha herself, a truth she had forgotten in the tangle of pain. The initial connection was based on silent presence and mutual acceptance. Leah demanded nothing, just existed in her space, and that for Martha was a gift. The stuffed bear, dirty and squashed, suddenly seemed less insignificant. A link between Leah's helplessness and Martha's protective quiet. That accidental encounter, that whisper of change, had begun to untie the knot of solitude that had bound Martha's heart for so long. In the days that followed, Martha's shed stopped being a temple of silence and became a space of whispers and small noises. Leah, with her diminutive presence, filled the corners with a new, though contained, energy. Martha watched the girl with a mix of curiosity and a tenderness she hadn't felt in a long time. Leah's eyes, once lost, now shone with an insatiable curiosity, especially for the motorcycles. The girl spent hours admiring the chrome lines, the complex gears, the tools organized on the workbench. For Leah, each motorcycle was a living creature, and Martha its guardian. One morning, while Martha tried to untangle a persistent knot in the chain of an old motorcycle, Leah approached, the stuffed bear under her arm. "Aunt Martha, the wheel is sad," she said, pointing to the flat tire. The motorcycle, an old model that he had loved and promised to restore, was forgotten in a corner, covered by a cloth that from time to time Martha uncovered just to relive painful memories. That flat tire, that sad wheel, was a reflection of her own spirit. Martha hesitated. It had been months since she had touched that motorcycle with a real purpose, just to dust it off. The mechanical skill, which had once been such a vital part of her identity and their life together, had been stored away with the grief. The tools, once extensions of her hands, now seemed heavy, distant. But Leah's gaze, devoid of judgment, just pure and curious, was a call. The girl had a need, a curiosity that only Martha could feed. Leah wasn't asking her to forget the pain, but to find new meaning in her hands. With hands that trembled slightly, Martha reached into the toolbox for a wrench, the cold metal slipping between her knobby fingers. The smell of oil and grease, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed like a forgotten perfume, an echo of laughter and conversations that filled the shed. She took the old coveralls from the closet, dusty, and put them on, feeling the worn fabric brush against her skin. It was like donning a part of herself that had been set aside. "Come here, little one," she called, her voice a bit firmer. "Want to see how we make this wheel smile again?" Leah approached, her eyes wide, watching every movement of Martha. The woman explained with patience and clarity the function of each tool, the importance of each screw, the mechanics behind the apparent complexity. She showed Leah how to polish the oxidized metal, how to feel the tension of a part, how to listen to the engine. The girl, with her childish dexterity, imitated Martha's gestures, cleaning the parts with a cloth, holding light wrenches, her small hands dirty with grease, but her eyes shining with joy. Martha saw in Leah the same curiosity that had led her to the road, the thirst to understand how things worked. With each tightened screw, each cleaned part, Martha felt an awakening. It wasn't just the motorcycle being restored, but also a part of her soul. The memories of her husband, once painful and suffocating, began to transform into a tender longing, a legacy of passion and craft. She remembered his hands, strong and skilled, teaching her the secrets of the engine, the silent language of machines. Now, with Leah by her side, those memories were no longer wounds but seeds, planted again in the fertile ground of her own wisdom. The immediate reward was Leah's pure and unfiltered joy. When, after hours, the wheel spun smoothly, the tire regained its shape, Leah let out a cry of contentment that reverberated through the shed. She hugged the tire, laughing, a crystalline laugh that seemed to chase away the dust and silence. It was the first genuine validation Martha had received in a long time, a recognition not for who she was, but for what she did, for the talent she shared. That small act of teaching, of guiding Leah's curious hands, was more powerful than any consoling hug. The activity awakened happy memories, yes, but more importantly, it awakened in her the spark of a new purpose, transforming grief from pain into a longing that, for the first time, seemed to carry the scent of hope. The shed, with the smell of oil and freshly baked pound cake that Martha had prepared for the little one, stopped being a refuge and became a home, a center of learning and mutual healing. The daily interaction with Leah unveiled layers previously hidden in Martha's perception. It wasn't just the girl learning to polish chrome or identify a screwdriver. Martha, in her contemplative rhythm, noticed the silent pain in the little one's eyes, the way she shrank at sudden noises, the way her hug on the stuffed bear tightened at the slightest sign of uncertainty. Leah was more than a lost child. She was an echo of vulnerability, of a need for affection and stability that went beyond hunger for homemade cookies, or curiosity about the garden flowers that Martha, from time to time, tended in the few hours of sun. The biker began to observe Leah's drawings, the houses without doors, the solitary figures, and understood that the girl's helplessness was deeper than a simple loss of direction. The small room in the shed, once used as a storage for old parts, transformed into a refuge for Leah. Martha, with a delicacy that only age and loss can teach, lined the cot with a soft wool blanket, a gift from her husband, and placed a lamp with dim light to ward off the fears of the night. And then came the courageous offer. Martha, who had always closed herself in her own pain, felt an impulse to go beyond temporary hospitality. She noticed how Leah was fascinated by the stories of her old road companions, the adventures narrated in an almost legendary tone. "You know, Leah," began Martha on a rainy afternoon, the sound of drops on the window pane punctuating the silence. "Life on the road, you learn a lot. About the engine, about the wind, but mainly about yourself. And I have a bunch of stories that no one has ever heard. If you want, I can teach you to listen to the engine of the soul, to find your own courage." Leah looked up, surprised. The offer wasn't a material gift, but of time, of wisdom, of a piece of Martha herself. And Leah accepted, not with words, but with a smile that lit up the shed. It was Martha's first step out of her shell, to offer her time and talent continuously, to become a guardian not just of motorcycles, but of a small soul. From that day on, the routine gained new colors. Martha not only fixed motorcycles, but taught Leah to repair hearts. She shared the lessons learned on the road, the importance of persistence in the face of challenges, the beauty of solidarity among those who support each other, the silent strength of a heart that resists. Leah, in turn, began to reciprocate, not with grand gestures, but with the genuine reciprocity of a child. She arranged the tools in the exact order Martha liked, left a pencil drawing on the teapot, and on cold mornings brought a worn shawl, knitted by Martha's hands, to warm the woman's shoulders while she worked. The connection was reciprocal, a flow and ebb of care and affection that broke Martha's isolation, building a bridge to the outside world. Leah didn't heal Martha, but helped her heal herself, to find new soil where her own roots could flourish again. Take a moment. What talent of yours is dormant, waiting for the right person to awaken it? Share that little magic in the comments. The smell of grease and hot metal, which once permeated Martha's shed, began to mix with the sweet aroma of oatmeal cookies and the freshness of herbs newly planted in small pots on the porch. Leah's presence not only transformed Martha's inner universe, but like a small breeze, began to stir the stagnant air of the small community. The murmurs in the village store, once about the solitary biker, now took on a different tone. "The widow with the girl," they whispered, with a hint of curiosity and surprise. Mr. Elias, the tired-eyed shopkeeper who once barely lifted his head when Martha came in to buy supplies, began to watch her more closely. He saw her leaving the shed, no longer with a distant expression, but with a contained smile as Leah ran ahead, her hair in the wind. He saw the girl helping her carry the bags, a small laugh escaping Martha's lips. That man who represented everyday indifference, the social barrier of invisibility, now noticed the change, first with surprise, then with a drop of admiration. Martha's transformation radiated a silent aura of purpose and kindness. Martha's circle of interaction began to expand organically. The mailman, who once just left the mail in her box without a greeting, now stopped for a moment, drawn by the smell of the breads that Martha occasionally baked with Leah, or by the beauty of the new flowers blooming in the once-forgotten flower beds. A neighbor passing by in her car, Mrs. Amelia, always hurried and absorbed in her own affairs, began to slow down when seeing Martha and Leah tending the garden. One day she honked lightly and waved, a simple gesture that for Martha was a bridge, a reconnection with a world she thought she had lost. One day, when going to the store, Martha encountered the same situation of invisibility from Block 1. The young cashier girl, distracted with her phone, hurried the customers with an impatient wave. Martha, with her hands full of flour and the sweet aroma of yeast coming from a bag containing freshly baked breads for Leah, waited her turn. When it came to her, the girl, without looking, pushed the items. But this time Martha didn't shrink. She lifted her gaze and, with a calm dignity that disarmed the indifference, said, her voice soft but firm, "Good morning, dear. May your day be as sweet as these breads." And with a small smile she placed one of the breads on the counter. The girl, caught by surprise, raised her head, a blush rising to her face. The bread, hot and fragrant, was an unexpected offer. She stammered a "thank you," her eyes meeting Martha's for the first time. The indifference wasn't fraught with anger, but with an unexpected kindness that transformed the tension into a moment of humanity. Martha didn't need to shout to be seen. Her new voice echoed with the kindness of a life that was blooming again. The symbolic object, the old helmet that once represented the pain of loss, now had a new meaning. Martha, with Leah's help, had cleaned and polished the helmet with care. And one day, Leah, with her colored pencils, drew small flowers and butterflies on the back, transforming the symbol of grief into a canvas of new memories. Martha wore it now, not as an anchor to the past, but as a sail for the future, a visible reminder that love and connection could transcend pain, creating beauty where there had once been only absence. The day of Leah's farewell arrived like a mist on a cold dawn, laden with a sweet melancholy and a silent expectation. The shelter had found a welcoming family for the girl in a distant city, and Martha knew it was the best for her. There would be no grand speeches, no ceremonies, just a discreet goodbye at the shed's entrance. But the community, which had seen her with indifference for so long, felt the weight of that moment. Leah, with her backpack on and the cleaned and mended stuffed bear under her arm, was ready. Martha, in her work coveralls, the smell of oil and hope on her clothes, knelt in front of the girl. Her eyes, once distant, now shone with a mix of pride and a familiar pain that, however, was no longer overwhelming. "You're ready, little one," said Martha, her voice a bit choked. "The road of your life is just beginning. Remember what we talked about. Courage, respect, generosity. Keep the engine of your soul running." Leah nodded, her own eyes teary. Mrs. Amelia, the once hurried neighbor, stopped her car on the dirt road, and Mr. Elias, the shopkeeper, left his store and walked to the shed's fence, watching from afar. They weren't just curious, they were witnesses to the transformation. Then Leah did something unexpected. She ran back to Martha and extended the stuffed bear. "It's so you don't forget me, Aunt Martha, so you don't walk alone." Leah's voice, once a whisper, was now firm, an echo of the courage lessons she had learned. Martha took the bear, the soft fabric against her chest, and felt a tear discreetly roll down her wind-marked face. That simple gesture was the deepest recognition, the validation that by giving she had received, not a return, but an expansion of her own capacity to love. At that instant, the shelter's car arrived. The driver, a woman with a kind smile, got out and thanked Martha with a firm handshake, praising the way she had cared for Leah. The eyes of Mr. Elias and Mrs. Amelia met, and a silent nod passed between them. Martha, the solitary biker, was no longer invisible. She was there, at the center of a small scene of affection and gratitude, an unexpected matriarch. Leah got into the car, but before the door closed she opened the window and shouted, "Bye, Aunt Martha, I'll take your stories with me." Martha waved, the stuffed bear pressed against her chest, watching the car disappear in the dust of the road. For a moment, the old silence of the shed seemed to weigh again, but when Martha started her motorcycle, the engine's sound seemed lighter, more alive, as if the wind was smiling too. The next day, the small village was already buzzing with the news of the farewell and Leah's gesture. The shelter driver had told the story at the store, and Mr. Elias, for the first time, shared his observations about Martha's transformation. "That woman has a heart bigger than the road," he said, surprising everyone. The community's antagonist indifference had transformed into recognition. Days later, a small package arrived by mail. Inside, a drawing from Leah, Martha on her motorcycle, with the stuffed bear on the back, and Leah, now with a small helmet, smiling beside her, and even more, a small photo. Leah, in her new home, teaching a little boy to polish a toy car, reproducing the gestures she had learned. The circle of kindness had completed, the lesson passed on, a flourish of hope that spread. The dust from the road, raised by the car that took Leah, had settled over the landscape. Back in the shed, Martha felt the silence, but it was no longer the hollow, dusty silence of grief. Now, it was a filled quietude, like the deep breath of someone who had just run a long distance. The morning light entered through the cracks, no longer drawing grooves of melancholy, but illuminating the traces of life that Leah had left. A small drawing on the workbench, a tool slightly out of place, the subtle smell of cookies, still lingering in the air. Martha sat in the worn armchair, Leah's stuffed bear nestled in her lap. The soft fabric, once dirty, now clean, carried with it the memory of small hands and curious eyes. That toy, a symbol of Leah's loss, was now an amulet of hope for Martha, the tangible proof of a connection that had sprouted on the asphalt and flourished in the quiet of a shed. She felt the gravity of absence, but also the lightness of fullness. The solitude, which for so long had been a dark and oppressive shadow, was now just the space where the sweet memories of Leah bloomed alongside the tender recollections of her husband. The narrator, with a serene voice, reflected on Martha's journey. The pain of loss, the invisibility imposed by time and society, had been arid soil, but like seeds waiting for rain to germinate, kindness, planted with trembling hands and a hesitant heart, had watered that soil, transforming it into fertile ground. Martha hadn't forgotten her pain. She had learned to cultivate it, to transform it into terrain for growth, for the flourishing of a new life, a new purpose. Healing didn't come through amnesia, but through resignification, through the rediscovery of love, through the act of giving. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, opening up to the other's need, and in that process had healed her own silent wounds. And she finally understood. The most beautiful gardens are not those without weeds, but those where each flower learned to grow around its scars, stronger and more vibrant because of them. The true voice wasn't the one that shouted the loudest, but the one that echoed with the kindness of a life well lived, of a heart that, even after loss, still chose to love. The longest road was not the one leading to distant destinations, but the one that led the heart back to the warmth of giving, transforming solitude into a melody of shared memories. Martha, with her silver hair and leather jacket, was no longer alone. She was living proof. That age doesn't extinguish the flame of purpose, but tempers it, making it more resilient and brighter. This was the spring of her soul, a late but intense flourish that reminds us that the journey of healing is a path paved with small gestures, with the courage to open ourselves to others, even when the wounds of the past insist on closing us off. Martha's story invites us to look inward, to recognize the dormant talents, the forgotten skills that, like old engines, await just the right touch. To roar again. It challenges us to question our own invisibility, to inquire if we are allowing the silence of routine to suffocate the melody our souls can still play. If her story watered something in you, if it sprouted a new perspective on loss, solitude, or the transformative power of kindness, leave a flourish in the comments so we know you're here, connected to this web of feelings. Tell us what you learned. Reflect on that little magic you hold, that craft or skill, that time or pain made you set aside. Who knows, by sharing you might inspire another soul to find its own spring. Don't let your own story wither in silence. Make it flourish. Share the beauty of your scars and the strength of your restart. Your voice is a garden, and it deserves to be cultivated and heard.